Sit. Stay. Who's the good boy? No, don't stop listening. This really is the Swim Coach Dad podcast, and I'll be talking about swimming, or rather swimmers. But today we're going to start talking about the difference between cats and dogs. This is the Swim Coach Dad podcast, and I'm Victor Coach Scott Wisner.
I go swimming in the water, swimming in the pool, swimming is cool. I go swimming.
I'm not much for labels or putting people into groups. Just doesn't seem to be treating people as individuals or giving them credit for having unique qualities. But because of restraints and the realities of training, we're forced all the time to put our athletes into groups. Senior prep, performance, intermediate or developmental groups, distance, mid-distance, sprinters, flyers, breaststrokers, IMers. I was at a clinic once, and one of the featured speakers, a noted college coach, and I were talking about training and how to motivate certain types of swimmers. He said in his southern accent, which I won't try and do because I can't do it justice, on any team, you'll have dogs and cats. Have you ever watched them play or just how they behave? Dogs are all action, or mostly action. You throw a stick or a ball, and they chase it. They want to be played with most of the time, and they respond when you want them to play. But cats do things on their own terms in their own ways. You can throw a ball of yarn or a toy, and if that cat isn't in the mood, nothing you can do will get that cat to play. It's a lot harder to get a cat to play on your terms. Now, you can treat a dog like a cat, I suppose, but that dog will still act like a dog. And you'll never get to the cat to chase a stick or a ball like a dog, so there isn't any point in treating a cat like a dog. The same is true with swimmers. You need to treat cats like cats and dogs like dogs, and you need to somehow help them make progress and develop in the same sport. That's your challenge as a coach. Well, there's a lot of truth about this. We've all seen swimmers who are dogs. They treat every workout like it's fun, give it everything they've got. They put everything they have into it, no matter what the set is or how hard it is. And we've all seen cats who will 1 minute look like they need swim lessons, and then when the set is right and the motivation is triggered, they're on fire and they swim very fast. This isn't to say that cats are lazy or dogs work harder. Cats are selective in their effort and need proper motivation. You don't often hear of someone training his or her cat. On the other hand, if you don't bother to train your dog, you'll have chaos, destruction, and some serious problems at home. Cats usually do efficient movements. And if you've ever seen a dog play, especially younger dogs, they're all over the place. And while they may actually chase the ball, they may not bring it back. They may just get distracted, or they might run all over the place before they actually get to the ball. The dogs my family has had can sense someone walking by the house and go crazy every time, especially if that person is walking a dog. Then again, you'd be lucky to have your average cat look up when you get home from work, unless of course he or she needs to be fed. The big difference is motivation. Dogs are motivated by external forces. Cats are motivated from within on their own terms. We see the same differences in swimmers. So there are swimmers who are the kind who'll do whatever the practice is to the best of their abilities every day. Just out of necessity, most distance swimmers are dogs, but it's more about mentality and personality than just a specialty. I've said before, there are sprinters who I've coached, or swum with, or known, who are the hardest working swimmers in the pool and usually out of the pool. And there were some cats I've known who were distance swimmers. They simply were selective on what they put their effort in and seemed to train on their own terms. Dogs aren't always the boys, and cats aren't always the girls. As I've said, the difference between cats and dogs is where the motivation comes from and their mentalities and personalities. Here's what I mean. One of the most notorious cats I know was a guy I swam with in college. This guy was not someone you would have thought was much of an athlete by looking at him, other than he was relatively tall. He was also extremely talented athletically, but you had to pay attention to really see that. For the most part, he came to practice and did what he was asked to do to the level he was willing to give at the moment. No one ever accused him of being a hard worker usually, and then suddenly he would blast some outrageous swim in practice. I remember once his group was doing a set of 10 100 kicks on some long rest, like 2 minutes or maybe more. He was a great kicker, so he was doing really well anyways. But all of a sudden, he kicked a 58.7 for a 100 kick without fins. It was remarkable, and since he didn't put big efforts in all the time, most of us were totally stunned. But his efforts were selective and always on his terms. And in those moments, we did get to see that kind of talent that he had if we were paying attention. Then there was a dog I knew in college, who was one of my best friends. He too was tall and athletically talented like the cat, But this guy gave his all to every swim, every set, every practice. He was a dog in the pool and out of the pool, with dry land, weights, but also with his nutrition. In a matter of speaking, coaches would throw the ball and he would chase it no matter what. In fact, the coaches could have used a nuclear ball launcher to throw the ball and he would find a way to get to the ball. While he had great swims in practice, he never really shocked any of us with an outrageous swim. The same was true in dual meets. The cat would have some impressive dual meet swims in some cases when he was internally so motivated, but most of his swims were ordinary. The dog had great swims and great meets just about every dual meet we had, especially when the meet was on the line. He could pull out great swims almost on command. But at the big meets, when motivation was high for everybody, the differences became less at times. At our conference meet, both the cat and the dog swam the 100 back, and both were in the championship final. Given how they trained, it was remarkable that they would be that close in time anyway. But in the final, the cat took off in the first 50, and it had a lead on the dog at the second turn. When they came to the last wall, the dog was just behind the cat, but the cat saw him and started to put in more effort because it suited him. At the finish, they touched the wall together and miraculously tied for the win. It was crazy how two very different personalities and training styles ended up tying. One of the interesting things is that the cat perfected underwater swimming, too, in those days. That was 40 years ago, long before it was common to do that, and even years after that, Dave Burkhoff started doing it. So this guy was really a pioneer. He had a gift for kicking, and so he put it to good use by doing something that we had never seen before. He kicked the entire first 25 underwater and 100 back. They didn't have the 15-meter rule, so you could go the whole way. You could basically swim the whole thing underwater until they changed the rule. He would come up, take a stroke, and then touch the wall and turn. In those days, you had to touch the wall with your hand and backstroke every turn. That was the key to him being so fast, but he went shorter and shorter underwater with each 25. Such was the drawback of his training methods. We all talked about what the motivation was of doing that. Seeing the chance to go faster, maybe, by doing something no one else was doing at the time? Or was he just didn't want to swim all 100 yards, and this was a way to swim far less? The dog trained in mid-distance stroke group and was far better at the 200 back, so his training methods paid off with the longer distances. The cat trained with the sprinters, and while he swam the 200 back, it was certainly on the upper end of his range. The dog could swim anything, and so he was a threat in just about any event except for the 50 free, probably. But in college, they had 3 events only. They could swim at conference championships and NCAAs. So both the dog and the cat were successful, but in their own ways in their own events. One of the other things about this particular cat and this particular dog was how the team viewed them. The dog had respect and support from everyone on the team for the most part because of the obvious effort he always gave. For the cat, because of his seemingly selective training, most were hoping he would learn his lesson with a solid trouncing by the dog. It never got that divisive, but it was always that undercurrent there. Another thing about this pair was that we always wonder, even to this day, how good the cat really could have been if he had just been willing to work more. He had so much going for him, except he trained like a cat. We never wonder about the dog, since he worked hard all the time and was really committed to doing all he could to reach his potential. And he had been successful, being a finalist at Olympic trials, so we had already kind of gotten to see where he could have been. But the cat really, that's one that we really wonder about. Coaches are usually very much aware, and we accept that we have both dogs and cats on our teams. In all honesty, coaching dogs is more straightforward, sort of like throwing a ball and the dog chasing it. We ride a practice, and no matter what it is, the dogs all dig in and give it their all. Training swimmers for dogs is mostly on the coach to provide the great workouts, and the motivation is usually built into those. One thing you absolutely have to do with the dog is make them work on technique. Like young dogs, dog swimmers want to go, and you have to slow them down when you want them to train to swim correctly and focus on technique. That isn't to say that dogs can't be technique-oriented. I've known a number of dogs who focused on their technique just as intensely as they trained in sets. But your average dog is less likely. Cats are different. It isn't as direct as throwing a ball and them chasing after it. So we have to find those factors that get them motivated and excite them within a practice. And those things may change depending on the day. Most of the time we can predict that short swims, lots of rest, and racing can motivate them. But it also may take some coaching encouragement, giving them something to go for in other sets. A time, racing someone, something just to get them kind of fired up. As with real cats, motivating cats in the pool is difficult too. When it comes to working on technique or starts and turns, most are very focused. I like to think it's because they want to be more efficient and to get most out of the effort that they expend. Each has his or her own triggers that motivate them to swim fast, and so what might be something that brings up the motivation from one cat, another will need something else. We try to vary practices from day to day. While it may seem like all we do is longer swims and dog sets, we do cycle through various types of training throughout the weeks and seasons. With the seniors, we do a lot of splitting of the sets these days so the cats get more like cat sets and the dogs get dog sets within the same practice frameworks. Besides, as I mentioned, cats will usually go fast when they are so internally motivated. We try to give them opportunities to swim fast so they can do so if the mood strikes them. One of the things I've noticed about cats over the years is that they sometimes, well, maybe more than sometimes, they regulate their own training. If they don't feel motivated, they may not come as often. That doesn't mean that dogs don't miss or even skip practices from time to time. They just come when someone can throw the ball for them to chase, so to speak. I coached a swimmer a few years ago who was a cat, and he absolutely hated being treated like a dog. He was your basic finicky cat, where everything was a dog practice in his mind. It got to the point where he was basically doing his own specialized workouts to keep him swimming. And he regulated his training by being incredibly inconsistent. When he decided to swim fast, though, he could really move, and he was forever working on his starts and turns. In college, the selective training still happened. He swam well, but for a couple of years, he gained the reputation of being the fastest 35-yard freestyler, the fastest 90-yard flyer, and the fastest 75 freestyler in the SUNYAC, the conference with all the smaller New York State colleges like Cortland and Potsdam and Fredonia and all those. So while he was very fast and leading the 50 free, the 100 fly and the 100 free late into the races, he couldn't finish his races and faded in the end. He mistook being lazy for training like a cat. Training like a cat is difficult because you yourself have to find ways to motivate yourself and assess what internally happens when you're motivated. You need to find ways to swim fast and train hard even as a cat, where you are selective but still working hard. Cats get themselves into the sport even knowing the kind of work it takes to be successful. Cats need to find those parts of a practice where they can expend the higher effort to develop and improve. Some of these problems with effort are a result of coming from other programs where everything was a cat workout or it was accepted. My son swam with one particular cat in college his first 2 years. This was a 4-IMer who trained like a sprinter, which is kind of an odd combination. One Saturday they were doing a set of 4 200 free on 230 or some longer interval. The set was descend, which is going faster in each successive one until the last one is usually all out. Never knows my son is a classic dog. Anybody that's trained with him knows that's how he does it. He goes hard the whole way. So in this particular set, the dog was swimming the set hard, as usual, and still descending. He was going something like 154, 152, 151, 150 point. The cat went 206, 204, 203, 150. A 13-second difference from third to the last 200. Now, you guys have heard me say in practice, especially the seniors, in common terms we would call that sandbagging. But being charitable, we could say that this cat was just swimming like a cat. Oh, he could have done far better, and the coaches should have been all over him since that really isn't the correct way of doing the set. But as a result, there was an outburst by the dog telling the cat that as a team captain he should be ashamed of himself for sandbagging that badly. And it divided the team some because some thought the dog was right and some thought the cat was just being a cat. Coaches need to be particularly watchful of this because cats and dogs can fight and cause chaos on the team if others join in. Some of the swimmers I've had the hardest time coaching were cats who were completely convinced they were dogs. They talk about practices like they gave every stroke their all and that they couldn't understand when others complain about them or when they don't swim well in meets. This is a personality type and sometimes requires some careful, let's say, counseling. The reality is that cats who think they're dogs are sort of in denial. I've heard others make excuses for them and warn me against calling them out when they are training like cats. The task is that these cats who think they're dogs need to pick a species, accept the limitations and disadvantages of being a cat, or the advantages and limitations of being a dog, but pick one. If you're going to train like a cat, accept and acknowledge you're swimming like a cat. If you don't want to be treated like a cat, then swim like a dog more. You have to make a more focused effort, and we'll go over that later. We had a swimmer on our team a while ago who was very talented and successful. She was a cat who thought she was a dog. She would consistently let other swimmers, most of them dogs and all of them slower, go ahead of her in sets. And then in classic cat form, she would crush the swim, usually the last one of a set, and climb up the feet of the entire lane. As I said, she was very talented, just very selective in her training. Okay, so we do have this phenomenon, which I really, really hate, where cats will call dogs tryhards, as if there's something wrong with working hard and giving full effort. Every time I hear someone call another swimmer a tryhard, especially with that horrible teenager tone of derision, I want to ban that phrase from society forever. I understand that calling a cat a sandbagger or lazy is just as bad, but when a swimmer works at practice and is given grief by others like that, well, it just seems a lot worse than being called out for being selective when a cat decides to swim hard and put in the effort. Besides, nobody likes being set up in practice like some of these people do. Some of these cats do. So I've tried to keep this podcast balanced because we will have cats and dogs on our team forever. It's in my entire coaching career. I've had both on my team at the same time most of the time. We work hard to get both kinds of swimmers to develop and improve to reach their potential, but in all honesty, we'd rather have more dogs than cats just because the effort and commitment it takes to improve and develop in the sport requires you to be more dog-like. The legendary coach Sam Freeze coached mostly sprinters in his career. The only reason I said mostly is because he might have had one swimmer somewhere along the line who was successful in 200 free or 500 free once in his 50 years of coaching. I can't think who that might be, but he probably had someone that could actually swim a 200 free. But mostly he was working with sprinters, and he was an expert in training cats. One of the things he told me was that there isn't anything that isn't done without effort in a sprint workout. If his swimmers weren't swimming all out, they were working on technique and being as efficient as they could be. Being a cat with Coach Freeze was a lot of work, and you had to be committed. When he wanted you to swim fast, you had to find the internal motivation to swim fast. He had dogs in his programs too, but he had a lot of cats too. And they had to learn to be cats who swim hard when the opportunities are presented. All right, so these are people. These are swimmers. They're not cats or dogs. And so much of this can be controlled. It isn't like if you're a cat, you can't become a dog at practice. Just because you got in the habit or the mindset of being selective in your effort, working when you felt like it, does not by any stretch of the imagination mean you have to stay like that. And while I've tried to give this a balanced approach, it is true that dogs do better than cats in this sport. We write practices for the dogs and make adjustments for those who aren't at that level of development or for those who are cats. It's a sport that takes more than selective effort. And while we try to accommodate those with cat-like qualities by modifying sets to give everyone a chance to walk out of the pool exhausted, we would rather have those cats make progress to train more like dogs. The first step is to acknowledge how you are training and the effort you are giving in practice. Are you being selective in the effort you're giving? Are you working harder and focused more on certain sets that suit you? When there are distances over 100 in a set, do you immediately look to the next set to see if that's one that you want to work harder on? You need to find ways to make every set count toward your progress. But this is all wasted if you don't want to change how you're training. I always suggest keeping a journal to track your effort and practice. Be honest on it and be religious about it so that you do it every day. But that'll help you make progress if that's what you want to do. Another, once a swimmer has decided to change, is to stop hiding in the locker room during longer sets or sets that you don't want to do. Acknowledge when you're not giving full effort or stopping to rest in the middle of the sets that are part of that change. You have to be honest with yourself about what you're doing in practice. We know there will be cats and dogs, and that some of the cats will figure out how to be dogs. And we as coaches endeavor to help everyone to become the best they can be in the form they choose to be. It starts with the youngest swimmers because expectations of the coaches and the program drive those who might be cats to become dogs. So it's part of the process, but you have to be honest with yourself and you have to acknowledge what you want to be. Do you want to train like a dog or do you want to train like a cat? Thank you for listening. Join me next time when we'll be talking about Read All About It coaching. Until then, this is Victor Coach Scott Wisner reminding you to keep swimming.